Hi again everybody, thanks once again for joining me for another installment of my Allan Holdsworth lesson series. So with everything that's been going on, I figured I might as well just do another lesson video if anyone would be interested in it. This is a song I've been putting off for quite a while because I don't know how many people would actually want to learn this one, but I thought it's relatively simple. It's actually very interesting because I actually have a lot of difficulty playing this one. I won't be able to do like an actual playthrough of it because it's actually too difficult. But conceptually, it's relatively easy, and it's a good insight into how Allan sort of thought of his sort of later material. He seemed to go through different sort of phases with his playing and his writing, and I think this song is a pretty good example of how he sort of thought about music or wrote music sort of later in his career when he was writing. So we're going to do Bo Peep, which is actually off of Flat Tire. Now this song is really a syntax tune, but he has played it live a few times, 2005, 2006. So I'm going to mostly be going over the live version of it, and it's really not that different from the album version. I'm sure the album version probably came up first, and then in order to play it live, just made some very slight adjustments to it, nothing really crazy. So also what's good about this song, it's one of the few tracks, or few Allan songs that we actually have his handwritten lead sheet. So I'll be able to go through that and sort of show you what Allan's thinking of over what particular chord during the solo section. So this song, in terms of understanding it, or if you, let's say, want to play it on another instrument, if you can't physically do it like piano, is actually pretty simple. But for guitar, I'd actually put this up there with one of his most challenging pieces, probably top 5. From just off the top of my head, I could be wrong, but it's pretty challenging. You'll see why. So anyway, here it is, Bo Peep. The structure of this song is actually pretty simple. There's only really two main parts. There's the sort of verse part, and then there's sort of, I don't know if it's a chorus part or it's another section. And that second section is actually what the solo's over, and then it goes back to the sort of verse part again with a slight modification, and then that's it. This is a good example of, as I said before, how Allan sort of thinks of music sort of later, or how he wrote later in his life. There's a lot of modulation. So there's not a ton of chords. There's actually not that many unique chords in there, but they get moved around and modulated quite a lot. And you'll start to see that why the song is so tough is because sort of the stretches that are involved in it are very difficult, even though the concept of the song is relatively simple. So first off, before we do the verse, I just want to say the syntax version is a little bit different because for whatever reason it's a whole step down. I'm not entirely sure why, if it's tuned down a half step or maybe it's the patch that Allan used, but if you try to play along with this, if you can play it, it's not going to sound right. You actually have to pitch shift the syntax version, or the one that's on Flat Tire, a whole step up. For whatever reason, I think it's in, I don't know if it's just tuned weird, but this is we're doing the live version. So anyway, the verse part is really simple. Most of it is really just these two chords. It starts off with this chord, which we've done before. This chord is in above and below. It's the very last chord. It's really just a D major 9. You have your D, F sharp, and the 9 here, and then we have the major 7, C sharp here. This chord is what makes the verse part so challenging because Allan modulates this down the whole neck. And one of the chords that I use in here, if you watch my other video, the top 10 most difficult Allan chords, I believe this one got a honorable mention. Because it's playable, at least for me, I can play it. The problem is the speed of this song. It's very quick, and it's got an up-tempo feel, sort of like someone skipping through a forest. So you can understand why the name he was inspired to call it, I guess, Bo Peep. So, and in an interview I saw, well, not really an interview, it was a, I guess it was like a clinic or something, people had asked about this song, or someone asked, and he just said it's all major 7th chords at the beginning. He's not entirely right, but he's not really wrong. It's how he thinks of the chords. So this is really starts up with the D major 9, and then you play this G major 9 with the 9 in the bass. This chord is also in Water on the Brain. Allan uses this chord pretty frequently. This chord, not so much. Although this chord is also in Above and Below, but it's voiced a little bit different. It's voiced kind of like this. It's this chord. So what is it? A G sharp is the same thing as this. It's the same voicing, but the challenge here is to really grab this D major 9 voicing very quickly. So it's D major 9 to this G major 9. That's it. And then that gets modulated down. So it's D major 9 to G major 9. Then you modulate down a whole step to C major 9 to F major 9. Then you move that down a whole step again to B flat major 9 to E flat major 9. And then you do this little chromatic thing to D to C sharp major 9. Then you take that whole part and now you modulate that down a minor third. So instead of starting on D, you start on B now. So B major 9 to E major 9, A major 9 to D major 9, G major 9, and you can see that's where that chord I was talking about comes to play, to D major 9, and then this goes down chromatically, D to, I'm sorry, C. Where did I get D from? Probably because the lowest note is a D. So it's a C major 9. So let me just reiterate. G major 9 to C major 9. And that goes chromatically down to B major 9 and then B flat major 9. Now I won't be able to play this in time, or at least up to speed, because it's pretty challenging. So I'll do my best here. And then from here, it goes down chromatically again to A flat major 9. Here's a little change. Instead of playing the B flat here with your thumb now, you change the bass note to F, and now you and then you add this A, and now you're playing the middle voicing of an F major add 9 chord. Then you take your middle finger off and you play the minor third, and now you have an F minor add 9, and then back to F major add 9. So I won't be able to play that, as I said, in time, but I'll play a little bit before it. And that's it. That gets repeated again. So you can see it's really just 2 chords, but because you're moving those down the neck, the stretching becomes really difficult, and the song is very fast, so switching chords is going to be really challenging. But like I say, conceptually it's actually pretty easy. So that's it. That's the whole verse part. It just does that twice. It comes back again later in the song, but it's modulated up a half step for the first half. And then the second half it's back to where it was. So I'll talk about that after the solo. So anyway, this is, I guess, the solo section. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about the chords, and then I'll analyze how Allan's thinking of those chords from his scale chart. So the first chord is this F13 sharp 11 chord, and anytime you have a dominant sharp 11, that's a Lydian dominant, it's a melodic minor, that's part of melodic minor. So you're playing it like this. And if you've seen this chord, this is actually very similar to the chord that I used in Zarabeth, or that Allan really used in Zarabeth for a minor major 9. It's just you change the bottom note, instead of it being C, it's F. This is a lot of times how it's easier to sort of think of chords by their sort of shape and using them. in different purposes. Like I know Allan likes to use this chord a lot. It's also in Zarabeth. But now if you want to think of it like that, you can almost think of it as like part of C minor. So almost like a C minor 11 kind of thing. But then if you take that minor 7, then you move it up here. Oh, well, see, yeah, it's more like a C minor 9, I should say, because you're using the 9. No, 11, because you want to treat that as the 11. But if I take that 7, that flat 7, and move it up to a major 7, then I have this chord. So you're really using the same kind of voicing, but depending on how you're thinking about it using the root, you can give it different colors. So for here, Allan's actually playing an F in the bass. So this to me is an F13 sharp 11 chord. And then he plays this little melody up here, where you're actually playing the B, C, and then D. And then from here, you go to a plain old E minor 11. Sometimes live he throws in an E minor 7 right after, like, and then those two chords modulate down a whole step. So now you have an E flat 13 sharp 11 with the same melody motif to D minor 11, just like before. Then from here you actually just take this chord and move it down chromatically. So you have D minor 11, D flat minor 11, C minor 11. Then you have this nice chord. I've used this plenty of times before if you've watched my other videos. In this instance I would probably call it an F sharp major 7 sus 2, because here's our F sharp major 7. And you can take the major 3rd and move it to the 2nd, and you have a sus 2, so a major 7 sus 2. So F sharp major 7 sus 2. And then this chord, we don't really see this one that often, but this is definitely one of Allan's go-to chords. In this instance, I would call this a D minor 6/9. For D, the root, we have our 6, our 9, and then our minor 3rd. Notice there's no 7th. That'll come into play later. So then, let me just play it in sequence what we have up to now. Also, another tip, when you're playing this little sequence, your 3rd finger doesn't have to move, so it actually makes it a little bit easier to get to that E minor 11 if you keep your 3rd finger in place. Then from here, you play a E flat major 7 sus 2 chord, and then a B minor 6/9 chord. So just like what we did before in F sharp, but now that's modulated down, I guess a minor 3rd. More modulation. We take that same chord sequence that we just did, and then we modulate it down a whole step. So everything's exactly the same, but now all the chords are down a whole step. So instead of F, we go to E flat 13 sharp 11 to D minor 11. So this chord's going to get a little tricky. C sharp 13 sharp 11, C minor 11, B flat minor 11, E major 7 sus 2, C minor 6/9. You've also seen this chord a lot. I should say in Pugwood. I remember he uses it down here because now you modulate to C sharp major 7 sus 2, and then A minor 6/9. Really challenging. Quite a stretch there. Now we take that same part and we modulate it up a whole step from there, or half step from where we started, but there's going to be a different ending here. So instead of starting on F, we start on F sharp, and it's a F sharp 13 sharp 11 chord. So this F minor 11. From here is where it changes now. Then you do these minor 7s, so F minor 7 to E minor 7 to E flat minor 7. You hammer on the 4 there, then you play this chord. This is basically like an A7, major 7 sus2 with the D in the bass. It's a very Lydian chord. So this is really like this is going to be a mouthful, D6 sus2 sharp 11. This is what naming these chords sometimes are so difficult, because the way that Allan thinks of these chords is, once again, it's not about tertiary harmony or harmony that's built in thirds or every other note. You're basically playing a lot of color tones and not any of the other kind of notes. So here we have a D, or a root, and then we have a fifth, our sixth, and then the 9, and then the sharp 11 with our first finger. So this is very much a Lydian sound, but we can't really call it some sort of major chord, even though it sounds very major, because there's no F sharp present. And because of those little details, Allan will sometimes like to exploit that detail and actually end up playing a minor third there. So it sounds like it's major, but then how he's interpreting later for the solo could be minor. In this case, it's actually a D Lydian sound. But that's why a lot of times these chords will have multiple scales that you can use over, and not necessarily different major and minor scales, but sometimes melodic minor or harmonic minor or something like that. Once again, you'll see that in the solo section. So anyway, where did I leave off? Let's start on F sharp 13 sharp 11. Whoops, it's sharp 11 there. Then from here, you end up playing I would consider this an F. I used to think of this as a C minor with a at 11, but in this instance, I think it makes more sense as just a regular 6/9. So this is an E flat major 6/9, just like the same voicing we used before. So right here, G is our major third to E flat, but then if we flat that to G flat, then we have that minor 6/9. So here, E flat, 6/9. And then here, we have this little sequence. I think of this little part as probably an E minor 11, because we have the minor third, E, the minor third, the flat 7, and the 11. But then what's happening on the top is Allan's actually playing a C, which is the flat 13, to the B as a little melody motif. Then you do that same thing a half step down to E flat minor 11. Then you move that up to F. But now what you're doing is you're now hammering on from the E flat to F. And then you take that chord, you move it back down a half step, but now you're adding a little bit more to it. You're really just adding in some extra melody notes. Oops. He's sort of playing the the D, and then the B. He plays everything like this with his third finger, so he's using his pinky to move up, but it's probably easier to use your second finger here and use your other fingers to play these notes. So you have E minor 11, and then you play the D, the B here, move it up a half step to C, and then back down. Something like that. So let me play that second half in total. Well, let me do that again. I totally ruined that. That's it. That's that whole section. So it's one sort of chord sequence, then modulated a whole step down, and then modulated, I guess, a minor third from there, or up a half step from where you started, but with an ending variation. Now that is actually what Allan is soloing over, and we have his solo chart here, so it'll be easy to see how Allan interprets some of these scales. So I'll take that opportunity to do that now. So just in the interest of time, I'll abbreviate some of the things that repeat the same way over again, or just modulate, just to really get to the meat of some of these chords. So that first chord, that F13 sharp 11, like I said before, belongs to melodic minor. And you can see on Allan's chord chart, he wrote C with X with the circle. And if this is the first time you've seen one of my videos, I did a whole a whole lesson on how Allan uses these scales and what their names are. So in here, they really only have two symbols. We have an X, and we have an X with a circle around it. And then there's an X with an O. I'll talk about that in a bit. X, it just means Dorian. So anytime you see DX, that means D Dorian or C major. You know, they're interchangeable. X with the circle around it means melodic minor. So here, over this chord, Allan plays C melodic minor, which makes sense because that would be like playing F Lydian dominant. But he's thinking of it as C melodic minor. And once again, it's also easy because we have the C on the right here. So over this part, it's C melodic minor. And then over this E minor 11, Allan wrote A Dorian, which belongs to G major. So an E minor 11 chord, that would be like our sixth chord to G major. So this would be like playing E Aeolian over that. So once again, he's thinking of A Dorian. Once again, that modulates down a whole step, so we have the same thing. B flat melodic minor to G Dorian, or D Aeolian, D minor. And then over that, just quick, brief little modulation, or just moving down chromatically, you'll see that Allan wrote G flat X or D flat X, G flat Dorian or D flat Dorian. Two ways of thinking of this chord. Once again, if you think of it like G flat Dorian, it's sort of like playing, what did I say before, E flat minor. Or you can play this as D flat Dorian, because that's the symbol D flat X and we're on the D flat. So you have two different scale choices, and it's interesting to see where they lead to, because G goes to G flat and then goes to C, or you can do G to G flat to D flat and then to C. So you're sort of moving down a half step, but G flat and D flat are just one tick away in the circle of fifths. So they are almost the same scale, except for there should be one note difference between them. So they're and that one note that's different between them is not present inside the chord, which is why you can use multiple scales. And you could do this for the rest of those, like with minor 11 chords. You can take them from anything you want, but this is how Allan's thinking of those chords. So anyway, after that, we go to C minor 11, and Allan wrote C Dorian, CX. And then we have our F sharp 7 sus2, F sharp major 7 sus2, I'm sorry. Allan wrote A flat X, and A flat X belongs to G flat or G flat major. And if we take up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, he's thinking of it as G major, F sharp. So over this chord, he's playing A flat Dorian, which is the same thing as playing G flat major, and which makes sense because we have there's a major 7 with a sus2, which you can find. Now here's the interesting one. D X with the circle around it over this. Now what does that mean, X with the circle under it? Well, I really sort of struggled at first when I started trying to think of, well, what does that mean? And the only thing that makes sense is, like I said before, over this D minor 6/9, we have the 1, the 6, the 9, and then the minor 3rd, but we do not have the major 7. So this chord can belong to two different scales, two different keys, if you want to think of it like that. It can belong to C major or D Dorian, or it can belong to D melodic minor. The only difference between those two scales is one has a C sharp and one has a C. Now, depending on where you're coming from, one scale might be better to use than the other. So I would say the chord before it, that F sharp major 7 sus2, we have a C sharp there. And then it goes to that D minor 6/9. So treating this as D melodic minor might make a little bit more sense because you're still keeping that C sharp there from the scale before. Or you can think of it as D Dorian, because that fits too. And then we go to, this E flat major 7 sus2. Allan wrote C Dorian. So this is like I think this would be thinking of it as more like a E flat Lydian sound. So now you have the sharp 11 here, whereas before when you played it you didn't have the sharp 11, you'd have the regular 11 because you treated it here as major in F sharp, and then treating it here in E flat as Lydian. And then the last chord is B minor 6/9, which Allan wrote B melodic minor over, as I just reiterated. Now comes to the sort of second cell. That whole section gets modulated, and this is, like I probably said before, something that Allan seemed to do a little bit later in his career when he was writing music. He would write out a chord sequence and then modulate that chord sequence in all these different places. Sort of like what he did in 16 Men of Tain, if you watch that video. He took a 2-chord phrase and then modulated that around, at least there was some pattern there. In this case, it's a larger chord sequence, and then you take that whole thing and then modulate it, and then you take that whole thing and modulate it, and then sort of change the end of it so you can sort of have an ending and then go back into your other section. So it's a simpler way of thinking of it, but it's tougher because now you have even more, even though there's more scales, there's at least some sort of logic behind it. So if you're thinking, if you think of the neck the way that Allan does, he doesn't really, he sees the whole neck light up. So because of the transpositional nature of the guitar, it's probably easier to just sort of think of, instead of the scales that you're playing, the relationship of all those scales moving forward and backwards, which is much tougher to do on the piano than it is on the guitar, but it's harder to visualize on the guitar because people just don't think of the scales that way. But I also want to point out something in the scale chart. There actually is a couple of mistakes in here. I guess Allan, when he wrote it out, just wasn't paying attention and just wrote it out quickly. I have watched live video of him playing this song, and he doesn't make those mistakes. It's just on this sheet. So it starts off the same way: B flat melodic minor, the G Dorian, whoops, A flat Dorian, sorry, A flat melodic minor, to F Dorian, E Dorian or B Dorian to B flat Dorian, F sharp Dorian, to C Dorian or C melodic minor, and then B flat, sort of the B flat Lydian. Not sorry, B flat Lydian, B flat Dorian, and then you should have an A here because this next chord is an A minor 6/9. Allan has A flat melodic minor written over it, which would be this, which isn't right. It actually should be A melodic minor. So just a little mess up there, and it might make sense that he messed that one up because of the next chord. He wrote C Dorian, I'm sorry, I keep on saying Dorian, C melodic minor over this, and it actually should be C sharp melodic minor. Because remember, it's that same chord sequence that we just used, but it's now modulated. And then over this, F minor 11, Allan wrote B flat Dorian. And then it's still, he's thinking of B flat Dorian here, but then when it gets moved down a half step, if E minor, E minor 7, which he's thinking of either as E Dorian or A Dorian, which gives it an Aeolian sound. So the only difference between them is that is a 6, whether it's got a flat 6 or a natural 6. To E flat minor 7, which he wrote E flat X, E flat Dorian, and then of course you hammer on to that the 4, the sus4, and then that mouthful chord, the D flat, D6 sus2 sharp 11. I gotta slow down a bit because it's just so many numbers and symbols and letters and stuff. So, like I said, this is sort of like a Lydian sound. Allan wrote He wrote B Dorian, which is part of A major, and if you go up the scale, A, B, C sharp, D, that 4, so that would be a 4th degrees Lydian. So B, he wrote B Dorian, which really gives it a D Lydian sound. Then over this E flat 6/9, he wrote F Dorian, which makes sense because F is the 2 of E flat. So he treats this as E flat major. And then here, when we go to that E minor 11, this is what's interesting. Allan wrote D Dorian. So that's our 3, D Dorian is part of C major, and if you go up to the 3rd, that's E Phrygian. So it's kind of got an E Phrygian sound, which kind of makes sense because you got the flat 6 in there with that. And then you move that down a half step, and Allan wrote a D flat Dorian, which makes sense. And then you move that whole thing up a whole step to F, but you don't add that flat 13 motif in there. But now this time Allan wrote D flat major, and if we go up the scale, D flat major to E flat Dorian to F Phrygian. Still the same thing. He could have wrote E flat Dorian here. I just, for whatever reason, didn't. Maybe he's thinking of it more as a major sound, because then the next chord, this kind of thing, the E minor 11, he wrote D Dorian as before, but he wrote the C with the D over it, and I think that denotes thinking of C major or D Dorian. They're part of the same scale, but I think it's what the emphasis on if you want to give it a major or minor sound. So to him, maybe modulating from D flat major to C major makes a little bit more sense. And that's what makes learning these kind of scales or these charts interesting, is because of different interpretations of those chords. If I'm seeing this chord, the major 7 sus2, I would always think Lydian here. But sometimes Allan thinks of Ionian, which does fit, but you would never know unless you have his handwritten sheet, or if you're actually looking at, or you're analyzing his solo, I'm sorry. So if you analyze the solo, you could say, oh, he's playing the sharp 11 there, so it must be thinking it as Lydian, whereas another time he goes, oh, he's playing the 11 or the 4 in there, making it sound more like a regular major. Or it could be a blend of both. Who knows? It could be whatever you want it to be. But this is just, once I said, how Allan thinks of the scales. So anyway, after Allan solos a few times, he gets out of the solo by playing the second half again. Well, not the second, but the third of the 3 sequences. Alright, and then we go back to that verse section, which repeats the same exact way as before, but the first time we're modulated up a half step. So instead of D major 9 to G major 9, we're now in E flat major 9 to A flat major 9. So E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, B, E, E flat, D, and then I believe C to F, B flat to E flat, A flat to D flat, to C to B, B flat, and then A. Same thing as before. Now you switch the bass up to G flat or F sharp, and then minor add 9. Then it goes back to D again. So it modulates back down a half step to D, how it started. D, G, C, F, B flat, E flat, D, D flat, B, E, A, D, G. Oh, let me play that better again. Now this is as good as it's going to get. G, C, B, B flat, B flat, A flat, F major A9, to then F minor add 9, and then F major add 9. That's it. That's the whole song. Relatively simple in concept, or just these little simple sections with a lot of modulation. So it's kind of beautiful in a way because it's really complicated, but it's also really easy. This is one of those songs that I'm sure if you had to play on piano would be such a pain in the butt, but one of the benefits that we have as guitar players is sometimes we don't have to, I shouldn't say the royal we, I'll say I, because I don't know how everyone else does it. Sometimes I'm not thinking of the notes per se, I'm thinking of the pattern and how the pattern moves on the guitar, and because of the symmetrical nature of the frets, well, not that they're all the frets, but the way that everything is just a half step up and down, I'm just thinking about where I have to play those chords, not the notes that I'm doing it. So I'm just thinking of two chords and going, okay, I'm going from these two to these two frets, and then I move that down to these two frets and these two frets. Whereas if you were to play it on piano, you're switching all these different notes and you got to know the chords, and it's much more challenging. So I would say this probably, if you have the hands for it, it'd be easy to probably play it on guitar, but to play it on the piano would be really challenging because of all the different chords and different finger configurations you would need to play them. Of course, if all the pianos were the same distance apart, you know, without the white keys and the black keys being different, if they were all uniform, like I think on the continuum, they're all the same. It would be easy because you would just use the two different hand patterns, just move up and down the piano. Anyway, I'm blabbering right now. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. The next video I'm going to do probably be one that it's a little bit, not really guitar friendly, it's another really tough one. I'm going to do White Line next. But if it's another really challenging one, but who knows? I might as well just throw them all out there, and if you can play it, I envy you, because I have a hard time with some of these, but we're getting to the bottom of the barrel, getting to songs that I can't really play, but I know someone out there can, or at least be able to appreciate them, or maybe even modify them and make them your own, which is the whole point of, I guess, learning these songs, is you don't have to play them the way that you want to. You can experiment and make them your own. Alright, thanks for joining me, guys. I'll see you guys soon.